Morning, call the meeting to order. We're going to have to take a roll call here this morning. Mr. Barnett, are you here? I see you. Can Clifford hear me?
Here.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Rivenbark still hasn't arrived.
Yes, I can hear Bill.
Yeah, I
Can you hear
see.
me? I'm here.
I see you, sir. Ms. Spears, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, Mr. Waddell, you here? Ms. Andrews, are you here?
Here.
Okay, Mr. Joyner is absent at the time. The chair is here, so we do have a quorum, and at this time, we'll go for the first consent agenda, C1, is approval of the minutes. C2 is a resolution authorizing amendment number 2 to contract S1.0223.1 with P2 of North Carolina LLC. This is Pivot Parking. Mr. Rumbark is here also. Okay. Okay. C3 is a resolution authorizing lease of real property at 929 North Front Street to Tova Wealth Management LLC. C4 is a resolution authorizing city manager to enter into a 3-year agreement with Best Technology Systems Incorporated for maintenance of the indoor shooting range at the Haynes/Lacewell Public Safety Training Facility. C5 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute a contract agreement with Sprint Turf LLC of Daniel Island, South Carolina, in the amount of $494,546 for synthetic turf replacement project at Allegiant Stadium. Yes, sir.
I didn't stop and read all the details on that last night, but
Yes, sir.
the first time we did it was just a lot of prep that had to go into putting it in because it was $1 million.
That's correct. And in your observation is correct that the subsurface work, that doesn't need to be redone. So they're just taking off the turf and putting new turf down.
Okay, thank you very much. I
You're welcome.
appreciate that.
C6 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into a 5-year agreement with UKG Incorporated of Weston, Florida for a systems upgrade and software and equipment fees. C7 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into a 3-year agreement with Environmental Systems Research Institute Incorporated of Redlands, California for GIS software and services for a total cost of $262,800. C8 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter an agreement with SHI International Corporation of Somerset, New Jersey for GIS cloud migration project. C9 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into a contract with GovernmentJobs.com Incorporated of El Segundo, California for 4 years for a total cost of $351,390. C10 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with ePlus Technologies Incorporated of Hendron, Virginia in the amount not to exceed $355,000. C11 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into a 3-year professional services contract with USI Insurance Services, LLC for property and casualty insurance broker services. C12 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to purchase 3 stormwater crew cab trucks from Capital Chevrolet Incorporated of Raleigh, North Carolina in the amount of $191,967.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Just to clarify, C4 has been removed from this agenda and will be moved to the next meeting per the chief's request.
Okay, very good. Okay. So we go C11 is resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into a 3-year professional services contract with USI Insurance Services, LLC for property and casualty insurance broker services. C12 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to purchase 3 stormwater crew cabs from Capital Chevrolet Incorporated of Raleigh, North Carolina in the amount of $191,000. And then C13 is a resolution city manager to purchase 2 traffic vehicles from Parks Ford HV LLC in the amount of $101,605. Then we have public hearings. PH1 is an ordinance amending the official zoning maps of the city to rezone property located at 203 52nd Street from R10 medium density single dwelling district to R5 medium density mixed residential district. Ordinances. 01 is an ordinance directing the housing inspector to vacate, close in, repair, or demolish a dwelling at 1004 South 7th Street as unfit for human habitation pursuant to Article 5, Chapter 16 of the City Code, and directing that a notice be placed thereon prohibiting its use or occupancy. This is going to be heard on a second reading. 02 is an ordinance directing the housing inspector to vacate, close, and repair a dwelling at 233 Racine Drive, Unit 3 is unfit for human habitation pursuant to Article 5, Chapter 16 of the City Code, and directing that a notice be placed thereon prohibiting its use or occupancy. Second reading again. Yes, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Rumber.
Can I ask you a question real quick on these last two? Excuse me. Has anything changed since we heard this 2 weeks ago?
With 233 Racine Drive, she has a vendor meeting with her today. I have an officer that's going to be there and check in with her. I had a meeting with her last week. Again, adamant that she can handle this herself. She just wants more time, and I've explained to her that she's had time. So we're going to see what happens today after she meets with the vendor, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you very much.
03 is an ordinance making supplemental appropriations in the amount of $1,007,822 to the Kerr Avenue Trail project from various transportation bond projects and the Transportation Bonds Bike and Pedestrian Contingency Fund. 04 is an ordinance making supplemental appropriation in the amount of $1,275,000 for the sale of surplus properties to pay debt service on the Skyline Center. Resolutions. R1 is a resolution to officially accept certain drainage easements in the Magnolia Plantation subdivision. R2 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with Terrier Development LLC for gap financing for affordable workforce housing utilizing $440,000 of HUD home funds. And then R3 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with Landmark Asset Services Incorporated for partial loan forgiveness to preserve affordable housing. And then R4 is a resolution expressing support for full consideration of Wilmington as the future site of the North Carolina Submarine Museum. And this is coming from Councilwoman Andrews. And with that, this concludes the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have 3 presentations for you this morning. The first one is by Jennifer Rigby with New Hanover County. She's going to provide us with an update on the opioid settlement funds.
Good morning.
Morning, Jennifer.
Thank you for your attention this morning and for allowing me to come and share with you the recommendations from the staff joint committee as well as the elected joint committee for the mental health and substance use disorder strategy. So you may recall, I guess it was about a year ago, I came before you and shared with you recommendations from last year, and these recommendations are all in alignment with the strategic plan that was drafted and developed jointly with the city staff as well as many community partners, community providers, and individuals with lived experience. And the focus areas for substance use and mental health disorders was around education, access to services and treatment, and then sustainable recovery and well-being. So we like to lead with the data, as Council Member Waddell asked us to do at our first meeting. And with this data, I think it's very much a level set for us in our community to help understand where we are in terms of the number of deaths by suicide that our community is experiencing, the number of opioid-related deaths, as well as the number of opioid overdoses. And so you can see from 2021 to 2022, these numbers are increasing. 2023, you'll notice there's an asterisk by the deaths by suicide as well as the opioid-related deaths. And that asterisk is because that data set is not complete yet. That data lags at least 6 months, and here lately it's even longer. So that data is not complete. But these Trends are very disturbing, very alarming for us in our community, and important for us to monitor and evaluate to ensure that the programs that are being funded are effective, because at the end of the day, we're trying to drive down these numbers.
Jennifer, under the opioid overdoses, 593, 571, 589, are those, what prompted those to stay just overdoses and not move on to deaths? Was it intervention, Narcan? I mean, can you help me there?
It could be a number of things, but yes, administering Narcan is part of that. That data, just to kind of level set with everyone, that's probably not all of the overdoses that we're experiencing. Those are the ones that our EMS are responding to. But we certainly know that individuals experience an overdose and have a loved one or a friend near them and can administer the Narcan as well, and those are not captured there.
But I guess it's safe to say, not being in that business and knowing all the ins and outs, but I guess it's safe to say that a lot of the opioid-related deaths were not don't rise to the suicide, or is some of those deaths by suicide as a result of an overdose that wasn't intended to be I don't even know how to ask the question. Some of these people over here on the two right side columns could very easily have been categorized as suicides?
So there are two different data points, and so the deaths related to opioid, that is just an individual that experienced an overdose and died from that overdose. The deaths by suicide, that's someone that experienced a suicide from another method other than opioids. But we know that there is a strong correlation between mental health and substance use disorders. So, so that is, there's a strong correlation there.
That clears it up somewhat for me. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Anderson.
I think you might have just answered this. So are the opioid-related deaths included in the opioid overdoses?
No, those are not included. So the data from the opioid-related deaths, those are coming from the medical examiner's office. And so those have been certified by the state medical examiner. And that's why those numbers are lagging a bit.
Do these numbers include, for the overdose numbers, does this include one person who had multiple overdoses?
It includes each overdose.
Each incident. Okay, thank you.
All right, so moving forward to the recommendations from the Joint Committee. What you see on your screen in front of you is the items that are in blue at the top of the screen. These are the items that were funded last year. And whenever they were funded with a 5-year commitment. So we have an annual contract that we renew each year, so we're evaluating performance measures on these particular programs, but the commitment was for a 5-year commitment. The items in red are new programs that the committee is recommending to fund this year, and I'll go through each one of these for you in greater detail. The first one is TIDES. This is a program that New Hanover County piloted a couple of years ago. It is for pregnant women or postpartum women that are experiencing substance use disorders, and it is an intensive residential and or outpatient treatment program. We typically have about 24 women that come through this on an annual basis, and we have seen great success from this program. As I mentioned, this was a pilot program that the county initiated before we had opioid settlement funds to utilize. It falls square in line with the intent of the opioid settlement funds, and so we would like to utilize opioid settlement funds for this current program. It's a $350,000 recurring expense. The next is the Healing Place. Again, the county has made substantial financial commitment to the capital as well as the ongoing cost of the Healing Place. And so now that we have opioid settlement funds, we would like to utilize those funds to assist with the ongoing expenses of the Healing Place. And so this would reserve 50 beds per day for clients that are in New Hanover County and that are experiencing an opioid use disorder. This is a new program and a new initiative that we would work with MedNorth. MedNorth is our federally qualified health center, and so this would be to provide services to individuals, and MedNorth estimates that they could provide the services to about 5 to 8 new clients per month, and so this would be for outpatient services. They're estimating just under $270,000 for this. Our next program is a unique program. It's from Face the Music, or Recovery Unplugged. This is a treatment facility that has locations that are outside of the state of North Carolina. They have treatment in Virginia, in Texas, in Florida, and so we would be purchasing treatment for individuals to go through their detox program and their residential program, and then come back and transition back into New Hanover County. One of the things we found out through the strategy was there is a significant shortage of treatment options, and so this would increase that capacity. We're looking at about $160,000 recurring over 5 years, and the estimates are that somewhere between 15 clients for a 30-day detox treatment, or 5 clients for a 3 to 6 month detox and residential treatment program, or some combination thereof. The next item that we have is to offset some of the expenses of staffing for our strategy data analyst, who has been compiling all of the performance measures and the data around the programs that are being funded to ensure their effectiveness, as well as the management of the contracts and the programs. And so this would be a portion of those salaries. And then the next item is a withdrawal management wearable device. This would be for Coastal Horizons in conjunction with a private organization called Opiaid. This would be wearable devices similar to an Apple Watch or a Fitbit that measures the different body temperature, heart rate, all of the different medical measures that help the providers to determine if someone is at risk of going into overdose. So it is a proactive and innovative program that would assist Coastal Horizons as they're administering.
Jennifer, that's a little confusing to me. These are people that are actively using opioids, and they put like a monitor on them to help me there.
There are individuals that are in a treatment program, but as we know with treatment programs, it is very common for individuals to relapse and have an overdose. And so this is for folks that are in treatment, but are being monitored through these devices.
I thought so. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And so this would be for $100,000 in year 1, and it would be scaled accordingly over years 2 and 3 and 4 based on its effectiveness. Just to share with you kind of the projected cash flow you see here, we have our scheduled cash receipts of how much funding we have received to date. And we have the planned expenditures, the cash flow, and then the projected cash balance. And I will draw your attention to the very last column and the last row, and that is a $745,000 figure. That figure is the amount of cash balance that you would have at the end of 5 years if all of these programs are funded fully. That $745,000 staff believes is a good number for you to utilize to scale programs as they're effective. So there may be a program that you're funding in year 1, and in year 4 or 5, you may decide you want to scale it up, and so that provides you the opportunity to do so. With that,
Jennifer, yeah, question, Mayor.
Yes,
Jennifer,
sir.
so at the end of the 5 years, that's the end of the opiate money, is that correct?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear
Okay.
you.
He said that
At the
in
end of the 5 years,
the money gone.
is that the end of our opiate money?
No, sir. Opioid settlement funds are being dispersed over an 18-year time frame. So
Okay.
this is just for the first 5 years of that 18-year period.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
Any other questions?
I do.
Yes, sir.
Can we go back to slide 5, please? Are you able to speak to us about the expansion of MAT at the detention center? I know that that's not in a new proposed program, but
Sure. So that program was funded last year. Currently, or previously, at the detention facility, if an individual came into the detention facility and was already on medically assisted treatment, they could receive medically assisted treatment. However, it did not include what's called the induction period. So there's an individual that finds themselves in our detention facility. They are a candidate for medically assisted treatment, but they have not started that. And so this would allow those individuals to start that program.
so this is saying as opposed to you're given an active sentence, you show up at the jail and you're already on MAT, you can continue MAT. This is saying you're given an active sentence, you get to the jail and you're screened for whether or not MAT is appropriate.
Correct.
Okay, great.
Correct.
Thank you. And then the other question I had was about slide 7, the healing place. This says it would essentially reserve 50 beds. My understanding was that New Hanover County already had a certain number of reserved beds. Is that contingent upon these funds and these funds continuing?
That's correct. The county had already made a substantial investment in the healing place in capital as well as in operating. That was before the opioid settlement funds were available, and now that they're available, the county would like to utilize the opioid settlement funds to pay for those 50 beds.
Okay. Thanks.
Jennifer, I don't know if you folks are analyzing on the data where you're talking about 5 a month, 9 a month, and you look at the national average, and then you look at what New Hanover County's projections are. 47 people per 100K opposed to the national average is 15, and 23 on the suicide and 14 the national average. When you look at that in the just geographic area of southeastern North Carolina, take into consideration Pender and Brunswick, if y'all have analyzed that, percentage-wise, what do our numbers reflect kind of what's happening in Brunswick and Pender? I know we have the higher population base, so obviously we're going to have the higher number, but from a percentage point of view, are we about the same? Have y'all analyzed that? And in the state of North Carolina, that seems pretty high. How do we
it
compare with
does.
the rest of the state, especially the larger metro areas, to determine if we're way above average or about in the middle of the pack or about the same?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have that with me today, but I can certainly get that data and share it with you.
I'd like to see it. Thank you. Okay, anybody else? Okay, sobering, but thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Next presentation we have is by Jared Patterson regarding the results of the 2023 Community Survey.
Barry.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. I am also joined by Nicole Smith, our Strategic Plan Manager for the city for this presentation. Historically, these surveys have been used as a way for us to keep our finger on the pulse of the community, and also used by some of our departments in tracking and measuring their service delivery. With the approval of the 5-year strategic plan and the creation of a strategic plan manager position, moving forward, these surveys are going to be playing a much more significant role as it relates to our strategic planning efforts. And so Nicole's going to be joining me for this presentation this morning. I'd like to begin with just some basic information for you, and also that in addition to the presentation that you were sent on Friday and that you see here, you're going to be emailed at the end of the meeting the full report to be able to go through. It's fairly significant in size. A few things that I want to note here. These surveys are a way for us to track customer satisfaction as well as the importance of services to our residents. It's conducted by an organization called the ETC Institute. We have been doing it at the city every 2 years since 2007. There's a random sample by household, so the household level is our unit of analysis for this survey. The surveys are mailed out. This year we mailed 4,250 surveys that yielded back 687 respondents. There's also an online version. If you don't want to fill out a paper survey, you can go online and fill a survey out online as well. Our margin of error is 3.7, meaning that 95% of the time we believe that the actual real-world number is going to be either 3.7 points above or below what we have observed in our measuring and reporting. We fielded this survey in November, December, through January, and then we received our initial data back from ETC in March to present to you now. In addition, a couple features that we started last year that I want to mention to you is we began oversampling some of our lower socioeconomic census tracts as a way to make sure that we are having enough respondents within those census tracts to be able to conduct further analysis. So we sent 1,000 additional surveys into those areas, yielding an additional 115 respondents. Those are not reflected in the overall numbers. That's an additional set of respondents that we can use for more in-depth analysis moving forward. We streamlined our emphasis, our instrument. Our emphasis is really on benchmarks and trends that we want to be able that we can measure. Generally speaking, if there is a question that the ETC Institute uses in their surveys that has benchmarking capabilities across other communities, we're going to try and include that question in our instrument. And then trend-wise, we want to maintain those questions over time so we can see any movement that may take place. We also added a question on most important problem style question and a service equity question last year. So this is our second year to run those. I also want to point out that we supplement these data through some additional community feedback opportunities in the meantime. So we do these surveys every other year. In addition, we use our newsletters to deliver surveys, and there are a number of department-led planning efforts that involve surveys. Our Parks and Rec Master Plan and the Greater Downtown Plan are just a couple of recent examples. We care a great deal about knowing and understanding the desires, wishes, concerns, and perspectives of the public because we consider that to be vital information for responsive governance. Here's a map of where our respondents came from in this survey. You can see that it is representative geographically. I'll also point out it's representative demographically, and that our oversample that I spoke of earlier does not skew our top-line results. I've got a few executive summary points to make to you. These are just major features that I think you're going to see when you're going through the full report and as Nicole walks you through the data. First is that there's a lot of stasis. From 2007 to today, you're going to see that there's not always a lot of movement. You see kind of modulation from year to year. but quite a bit of stasis overall, dating back to 2007. One thing you're also going to notice this year is that nationwide, there was a significant decline in the satisfaction scores on these surveys. If you look at the graph on your screen, the lighter shade, sort of a pink shade, that's the benchmark average that ETC measured from 2001 to 2003, and you'll notice there's a 19-point decline over that 2-year period. You're going to see the darker line is Wilmington. So Wilmington was not immune to that significant erosion in satisfaction, but the erosion that we measured in Wilmington is significantly muted relative to that national benchmark. And you're going to see that kind of carry throughout the survey, that while our local numbers have declined, when you look at that relative to the national benchmark, you're going to see a pretty significant gap in many cases opening up between Wilmington and the benchmark communities that ETC has measured. And I also want to point out to you, you're going to notice that Wilmington is a place to live. Overall score is very high. About 3/4 of our residents rate very positively the city of Wilmington as a place to live. Just like with customer satisfaction, that number did decline over the past couple of years. But if you look at us relative to the national benchmark, we were 8 points above the benchmark in 2021. We are 25 points above the benchmark today. So in 2 years, you saw a 17-point increase in that overperformance of Wilmington versus the benchmark communities, even though the overall number declined somewhat. And the last thing I want to point out to you is when you look at challenges that we face, growth and traffic are going to really kind of pop out as significant challenges, growth-related, traffic-related issues. You're going to see that pretty consistently in the data. Something that I want to point out as well, and then I'll hand it over to Nicole, is one caveat to keep in mind, is that these data don't happen in a vacuum, right? We are in a social geographical context, and our context is unique relative to many other communities. We're a fast-growing community that's essentially on a peninsula. So people keep moving here, but the land is not increasing. So we're going to have growth and traffic-related issues. We have a coastal context that is unique to us versus many of the other communities that are in these benchmarks. So when you see, for example, Wilmington performing not as well on growth and traffic-related issues, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a disconnect between the public perception and the work of the city and city council. What it may be ultimately reflecting is the difficulty of the challenges that we are addressing. And that is, I think, highlights really the importance of why we're tying this project together with the strategic plan, because many times these aren't quick fixes. It's not the kind of thing that you can just wave a magic wand and get rid of a problem. It's going to take concerted effort over the long term, and that's why a strategic plan is so valuable. And so with that, I'm going to hand this over to Nicole to walk you through the data.
Thank you, Jared. Good morning, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and members of council. Jared touched on this a little bit, but what do we do with the data that we're collecting in this community survey? The community survey serves as the foundation for several of the city's initiatives, including the organization's 5-year strategic plan, departmental multi-year business plans, and annual individual work plans. We utilize the data collected through the community survey instrument to identify the community's priorities. The priorities are used to establish organizational goals and translate those goals into actionable strategies that guide our focus, work, and resource alignment. The data collected to date serves as a baseline, identifying our organizational strengths, shortcomings, and needs for shifts in service delivery and programming. In the coming years, we will continue to utilize this data source to evaluate the success of our strategic plan implementation, progress of each of our key focus areas, as well as our departmental plan initiatives. Having established the context of what we do with this data and its importance to our work, we will provide an overview of the survey results. The Composite Customer Satisfaction Index was touched on briefly by Jared. It is a mean rating given for all major categories of city services that are assessed through this instrument. In 2023, the city's rating dropped by 7 points from 2021. As mentioned previously, this trend is not unique to Wilmington. The Composite Satisfaction Index has dropped across the continental United States post-pandemic. In fact, the city's rating remains 22 points higher than the United States average. This is not to say that we do not have work cut out for us to improve the quality of life of our community. Growth management and the availability of job opportunities present the areas of greatest opportunity for the organization to improve. Approximately 30% of respondents feel tax dollars and collected fees produce maximum service and programming. While the approval rating has decreased, it is not a significant deviation from the 2021 findings, and again, is a product of post-pandemic perception. Comparatively, the city approval falls 1% below the average for the Atlantic region and 3% below the national approval rating. The data on your screen is organized by the most satisfied on top and services needing the most improvement along the bottom. Dissatisfaction is on the rise across the board. The ebb and flow of service satisfaction is consistent with our benchmarking and our internal history of community surveying. The services that could benefit most from enhancement are the maintenance of city streets and sidewalks, as well as management of traffic flow. We have touched on the mood of our community and nation as a whole on previous slides. It is important to note that not all city services have experienced a decline in satisfaction. Council's investment in management of stormwater runoff and maintenance of city streets and sidewalks have been acknowledged with improved satisfaction from the 2021 results. Additionally, constituents tend to agree with sentiments proclaiming that city employees are the most valuable resource of our organization. Quality of customer service by city employees increased 1.3% since 2021. Comparatively, the city's quality of customer service is 22% higher than the average in the Atlantic region and 19% higher than the United States average. Citizens elaborate on the interaction with city staff through question 14B. The majority of customers report satisfaction with the accuracy of information received, the way they were treated, ease of contact, as well as overall resolution. This slide demonstrates the variety and volume of departments across the organization that are involved in the citizen interactions being reported. Recycling and trash handle the bulk of correspondence, police second, with planning and development, and parks and recreation following in third and fourth places. In addition to interactions with staff, citizens are asked to help establish priorities by ranking services of most importance. The top 4 service categories emphasize the desire to prioritize the safety of our neighborhoods, specifically management of traffic flow, maintenance of city streets, and overall quality of our public safety departments. Public infrastructure assets are a foundation of a community's economic development. Maintaining such assets in a good condition is critical. Infrastructure wears out over time and use. Areas of greatest concerns regarding the city's current maintenance operations include timely street repairs, signal timing, and maintenance on neighborhood and major streets. A fairly new question to the catalog in 2023 asked for feelings of safety in a variety of locations. Downtown Wilmington raised the greatest concern among respondents, followed by community parks, retail, and neighborhoods during evening hours. Comparatively, overall feelings of safety in our city fall below the Atlantic region by 10% and the nation by 5%. Initiatives to address the less than average overall feelings of safety in our community can be prioritized with a concentration on efforts to prevent crimes, improved response times, and community relationships with our police department. Additional challenges our organization needs to address include growth and development, traffic congestion, availability of affordable housing, and the rising cost of living. Every community has challenges and opportunities to improve upon service delivery or program aspects. Generally speaking, 74.4% of respondents find Wilmington a treasured place to live. 50.8% are comfortable with finding work or building a business in our community. Comparatively, Wilmington residents acknowledge our community as a great place to live, 16% more than the Atlantic region average, and 25% more than the national average. Work-life satisfaction in our community falls below the Atlantic region by 12% and nationally 6%. With that, I'll turn it back over to Jared to tie up our loose ends.
Before I hit the last couple slides, I do want to throw one other point on there. We did mention the perception of safety in the community. One thing that I want to note, if you go back to 2001 compared to the survey we just did, is when we ask folks the most important challenges that they face, they have 3 response options to give us their top 3 problems or challenges that they see facing the city. Over the past 2 years, crime has moved down as an important problem or the perception of a very important challenge from 35% to 26% of residents. So I do think that we've seen some marked gains from the work that City Council and the Police Department have done over the past several years. So I do want to point that out before moving to our final slides here. I want to talk to you just a little bit about this oversample. This is a map of where we oversampled. These are what we call qualified census tracts. What that means is that at least half of the households in this census tract have an income of 60% or below the median income. It's a very good way for us to analyze data by socioeconomic status. We want to make sure when we're using these data, when we're using these surveys, that the voices of those in these census tracts are not covered up by the majority population. And so we're giving special focus and attention to that. I'm going to show you now on that most important challenge question how we can see differences sometimes emerge along these lines. So this is our most important challenge question. If you look at the orange line, that's going to be the overall population that you saw earlier on our slides. The blue line is going to be respondents within those qualified census tracts. And while you will notice that the top 5 challenges, there's a lot of similarities, the gradations and the level of priority that are assigned to those challenges can be significantly different. So let me look real quick at the top 4 on this list. Affordable housing, for example, if you are in a qualified census tract, then there's a 16-point increase in your perception of that as a major challenge facing the community. Conversely, traffic congestion, there's a 14-point decrease in the perception of that as one of the most important challenges facing the community. Homelessness is a 12-point difference, and then growth and development is a 19-point difference, where that is not perceived to be as important of an issue in the lower socioeconomic census tracts as it is for the population as a whole. So I just wanted to point that out to you. These are really helpful data. I've got one slide here that kind of shows you a side-by-side of what those top 5 challenges are for those two, for the overall population and also for our lower socioeconomic area. The number next to it is the percentage of respondents who cited that as a challenge.
Hey, Jared.
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you a question, and maybe I'm missing something, right? So we are collecting data, and let me see how I want to say this. We're using socioeconomic status as the basis for this data we're collecting, right? But how are we using it? I'm not hearing what are we going to use it for. I'm not hearing the improvements we're going to make by collecting this data. Am I missing that? Because I see these categories, but I don't see where we're gonna apply this information that we're collecting about the citizens of our city, and then what are we gonna do to help?
I've got two things. The first thing I would say is just a slight adjustment is that we're actually collecting these data within those geographic census tracts, and we are measuring, we are giving particular attention to those census tracts because we want to make sure that the overall population, because you tend to have a lower response rate in those census tracts, we wanted to make sure that those voices were not getting covered up by the balance of the population. So we wanted to oversample those areas. What that's going to enable us to do is perform actual statistical analysis as to what priorities are within those areas vis-a-vis the rest of the population, and that's going to feed into our planning efforts to make sure that that's not getting quiesced in the overall project.
Right. I hear that, and I understand that. So we're collecting that data to get a response from people in those census tracts. But still, you know, we should be formulating a solution if we can identify that there are issues in those census tracts. What are we going to do going forward? It's just my thing, and maybe that's just the seed that I want to plant into your head and the heads of others, because I would be less prone to respond to a survey if my life was not up to the standard of others in this community as well. I hope that makes sense.
That does, and certainly we hope that all of these data are going to be actionable and inform the work that we do.
Thank you.
Last thing I want to point out to you is that you're going to see at the end of your report, you're going to have these matrices. What the ETC Institute does is they take customer satisfaction, they plot it on one axis, they take importance of service, they plot it on the other, and that's going to help you look at what are those services that are maybe low performers but also high importance areas. That's going to be the bottom right quadrant, and just a good way to visualize these data as you're deciding how you want that to inform the decisions that you make. And that's all we've got.
All right, Jared, Mr. Mayor, got a quick question for you. Jeff, with the survey, did you guys do any age, like explanations, like was there like an age category or anything like that, or did you do gender or anything like that?
So our analysis level on this survey is actually a household.
Okay.
And I'll have to check and see if they have individual level demographics. I believe that it's a household level, and so some of those are not necessarily present.
Okay. Thank you.
If I can, I'm looking at the survey instrument so I can respond more effectively to that. There is a demographic portion of the survey that reports on aging. The majority of response rates for the average household is going to be for those under 35 years old of age, which is consistent with our median age for the incorporated area of Wilmington, which is 35.9.
Okay. Thank you.
Last presentation we have this morning for you is the quarterly Land Development Code updates from Catherine Thurston and Ms. Linda Painter.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor, members of the City Council. This presentation is just a brief overview of the next batch of Land Development Code cleanup items, which is scheduled for your consideration on May 22nd as part of the ongoing process to correct errors or elements that do not work in implementation, including changes to the universal use table, the R3 purpose statement, accessory buildings and dwellings, legacy districts, and electric vehicle parking. The first one of those items is an amendment to the universal use table to reflect that offices are not a permitted use in the residential historic district. The code in effect in 2021 only allowed such uses when occupied by a nonprofit historic organization. However, the new code does not differentiate between types of professional office uses, and the intent was to delete this as an allowable use in the HDR, which is reflected in the use-specific district standards. The second amendment will change the purpose statement of the R3 district. Currently, the R3 zoning district only exists within the 1945 corporate limits. However, the same type of historic development pattern exists beyond that border. The proposed amendment would delete reference to the 1945 corporate limits in the R3 purpose statement and would facilitate potential rezoning to R3 outside that area, and that area is shown on the map in front of you. The third amendment will just correct a reference to a table in the Central Business District standards. Amendment 4 will remove density limits for watershed resource protection areas and conservation areas within legacy districts. Legacy districts include the MX, the UMX outside the 1945 district, some multifamily districts, and the R20 residential district. When rewriting the Land Development Code, staff recognized the impervious surface area impacted water quality in our tidal creeks and waterways more directly than density, and decided to base exceptional design allowances on that metric alone. However, those provisions did not automatically carry over to the legacy districts, even though staff continues to believe that this is the best management practice in those sensitive areas. Amendments 5 and 6 are related to accessory buildings and structures, including accessory dwelling units. The Land Development Code allows up to 2 accessory buildings per parcel and limits the combined area of those buildings to no more than 100% of the square footage of the principal dwelling. Accessory dwelling units are allowed up to 1,200 square feet. The table in the code inadvertently also restricts the square footage of any accessory building to 1,200 square feet, whether it's used as a dwelling or not. This amendment would also correct that discrepancy, and allow all of the allowable square footage of accessory buildings to be in one building if desired. The illustration at the top shows what is currently allowed, and in the bottom right-hand corner, even though it's the same amount of square footage, that would not be allowed because the building itself is over 1,200 square feet. And with the code amendment, either configuration would be allowed. ADUs will still be limited to 50% of the square footage of the principal structure. However, accessory buildings in general will not be. Current code allows accessory dwelling units in every residential zoning district, whether the lots are conforming to the area requirements of the district or not. Lots that are non-conforming, however, are only allowed as attached ADUs, which can result in arbitrary connections, as you can see on the screen in front of you on the lower right-hand corner. The proposed amendment would also delete language distinguishing between internal and attached ADUs, since the code treats the 2 types of dwellings the same way. The next 2 amendments I have for you will correct typographical errors. In the landscape standards, the code reads that 1 canopy tree per 12 parking spaces is equal to 12 canopy trees per 44 parking spaces, and that should be per 144 parking spaces instead. Land Development Code Section 18589 pertains to modifications to approved plans and when such changes necessitate re-review by the governing board. Code currently states that a reduction in the size of public utilities would require a modification. However, this is illogical, and it should state that an increase is considered a major modification. For the rest of the presentation, I'll let Linda take over. This is regarding electric vehicle parking, which you'll recall was originally presented as a cleanup item to align the metrics used to calculate required parking for electric vehicles. However, this sparked a lot of interest from Planning Commission and City Council, and staff has further researched and refined this section of the code, and so Linda will discuss the proposed changes with you, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about the other amendments, either now or after her presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, Mayor Pro Tem, and members of council. As Catherine mentioned, the proposed amendments to electric vehicle came out of the continuance of this item from the last package. Staff has done additional research that I'll be presenting this morning, and the proposals were further refined by the Planning Commission. What you see on your screen is the exact language that exists in the code today, and we basically are requiring that if you have, for any parking lot with 25 or more spaces, that 2% of those spaces have a full charging station, and 2% of the spaces be electric vehicle ready, meaning that there's conduit and other ways to provide those stations in the future. Because we have not defined what a full vehicle charging station is in the current code, staff has interpreted that to be a level 1 charging station, which is the same as just an outlet you would find in your home. Some of the questions that we had received were, what has the impact of these requirements been? So we have had 19 projects that have been approved since December of 2021 when the regulations went into effect that were subject to the EV parking requirements. Unfortunately, I know there was a request for us to provide addresses of where those could be viewed. They are still under construction, so we don't have a finished product that we can refer you to. What we can tell you is that of the 4,336 parking spaces that were associated with those projects, 94 spaces will be full charging spaces and 109 will be EV-ready spaces. The chart that is on the table beneath those bullets comes from the City of Raleigh, which in 2022 published an EV-ready playbook, a guide for charging station preparation, installation, and management. And staff found this incredibly helpful in terms of just the overview of what it takes to prepare for and install electric vehicle charging stations, as well as costs. This chart also comes from Raleigh. They obtained this information from the City of Denver, which has estimated essentially the savings that occur if you put certain infrastructure in place, even if you're not installing a full charging station. If you're installing infrastructure at the time you do your site development, there are cost savings that will be realized when you go to install those charging stations in the future. We also researched incentives, as that was part of the council's discussion the last time we brought this forward. And we looked at the city's benchmark communities that we evaluate to see how they address different issues. And we found 4 communities that address EV parking in some shape or form. Those include the city of Charleston, South Carolina, which provides a height and density bonus. They use a point-based system for their height and density bonuses, and provision of electric vehicle parking is awarded 1 point if you meet the minimum criteria for that. I believe they require 6 points in order to attain the minimal level of bonus. We also found that there are various incentives that have been provided, such as exempting EV parking spaces from maximum parking requirements, as well as providing additional credit towards minimum parking requirements for each EV space provided or EV-capable spaces that are provided. In terms of mandatory requirements, what we did find was in the 2 communities that had requirements either for installing full charging stations, doing EV capable, so putting in that infrastructure, or a combination of both, is that it was not applicable to all uses. Those communities tended to limit the uses that the requirements would be applicable to, usually to some type of multifamily development, mixed-use development, commercial development. And the other piece that we found was that they're also distinguishing between EV-capable, EV-ready, and EV-SE, or electric vehicle supply equipment installed. And the graphic, again, from Charlotte gives you an idea of what they're talking about. So EV-capable is your living room and your electrical panels and installing raceway. EV-ready is you've got the panel, you're also bringing it and installing the conduit and either a junction box or something to allow the charger to go in, and then installation is your full charging station being installed.
Linda, we have a question, Mr. Waddell.
Linda, just a couple quick clarifications. So the benchmark cities, Charleston we utilize as one of the benchmark cities for their incentive structures. Do they mandate EV
Charleston does
parking?
not.
They do not mandate, so they have an incentive package
They,
basically in there.
they solely do it as part of their height and density bonus.
Understood.
And
Thank you. And then the mandatory requirements, who are the benchmark cities that had mandatory requirements? Just
Charlotte has mandatory requirements, and Greenville, South Carolina also has mandatory requirements. In that case, does not appear that they require the installation of the stations, but they focus on having the infrastructure in place for 10% of spaces. The last community is St. Augustine, and they have it as a requirement, but it's only in their mobility-oriented development district, so it only applies in one district that is focused on transportation and mobility.
Okay, thank you.
So the proposed amendment, staff developed a proposal that we brought back to the Planning Commission, and I will say the Planning Commission discussed it and debated it and made some revisions to it. They took a lot of time on this and had some of the same comments the council had, and really were kind of struggling with a couple of those points, and thought that this met the middle ground. This recommendation was also presented to the Clean Energy Advisory Committee, which also voted to support the Planning Commission's recommendation. So the first component is that we, first of all, define what we mean, so that instead of just talking about a full charging station but not identifying what that means, that we actually establish definitions for EV capable and EV SE installed. And so what you'll see on the screen is that for EV capable, it's reserving space in the electrical room for a panel to serve future EV chargers, and doing a continuous raceway from that panel space to the future EV parking space. For installed, it would be EV charging stations capable of providing a minimum of 12 amp and 1.4 kilowatt. That is a level 1 charging station consistent with what the city, what we've interpreted our current regulations to be today. We have also proposed incentives. So the first incentive would be to any EV SE installed. If you put that charger in, you would be exempt from maximum parking requirements. If you are putting the charger in, we would also count that space as 2 spaces towards minimum parking requirements. And if you do EV capable spaces, those would be counted as 1.5 spaces towards minimum parking requirements. So basically, we're giving you credit to reduce the number of parking spaces that you need to provide overall based on what you're providing for electrical vehicle parking. And on the other side, we're also saying we won't penalize you. If you're putting those spaces in and you're bumping up against the maximum, you actually want more spaces, we will not count any space with a full charger as a parking space.
Question?
So a person living in an apartment complex with these EV capable or EV installed, that's their parking spot? They move in there, they hook up, and they stay there until tomorrow morning?
Let
me finish.
Okay.
That kind of rubs against doing away with the maximum parking that would be required, because if they're using 2 spaces, one to charge and one to go get it. I don't understand why you would relieve them from their parking requirements.
So I think this was, again, trying to provide an incentive and looking at what other communities do. This was one of the incentives that we found. The intent with these spaces, and that would be up to each individual property to manage how they want to do this. We don't have anything in here on how long you can park in a space. I know in the city garages, we have now established that you have to move your vehicle within a certain period of time after it's finished charging.
After it's finished charging?
Correct. So that would be up to the property manager. If they found that somebody was, occupying that space the entire time, and they needed to, that would be up to them to manage that with whoever's using that space if they're not moving their vehicle. In terms of the maximum, that's really something that we have established maximum parking as a way to try and balance and encourage transportation and not just have parking that sits unused. For the most part, developers are finding what makes sense for them in terms of parking. They're identifying that.
And I think they will also find out what makes sense for them as it regards this and their marketability and what the public, what their people want. Thank you.
Ms. Andrews?
And there's nothing to prevent them from charging, leasing a parking space with an apartment, because, I've owned condos where I had a deeded parking space that went with it, and there's nothing to prevent them from putting in electric vehicle parking spaces as needed and charging extra on a lease, that be your leased parking space. Is that correct?
Correct. We do not get into how they manage their spaces, whether they charge extra if you get a parking space or if you get a covered parking space or one with charging capabilities.
Thank you.
The next piece that we are proposing is that, as I mentioned earlier, currently this applies to all parking lots with over 25 or more spaces that are being installed. Under the proposed amendment, it would be limited to multi-unit dwellings, so that to accommodate residential users who don't necessarily have a garage where they can plug in, hotels to assist in dealing with the tourists and visitors that are coming, as well as large-scale retail and commercial or standalone parking lots. And so the hotel, retail, and commercial standalone is really to address visitors that may be coming to Wilmington and what they're looking for as they bring their electric vehicles. We are also proposing that if there is a residential development that is receiving governmental financing, so for affordable or workforce housing, that instead of having to install the chargers, that they be able to meet the requirements solely through providing EV-capable spaces. And that would allow them to better manage their development costs while providing infrastructure to meet future needs. One of the comments that we've heard from our affordable housing developers is that many of their clients today don't necessarily have EV vehicles, so installing chargers that are not going to be used is an issue for them. On the other hand, we don't know where this technology is going, so putting in raceway and electrical panel space is something that we think may be something that reduces that cost and doesn't put them in the position of having to install it right away when it's not something that's warranted.
Mr. Mayor, so we acknowledge by that piece, we acknowledge as a city staff here that it is an additional cost that affects affordability. Because when we have government subsidized projects, we understand that it would adversely affect that developer, and to make sure the project pencils properly, we're trying to get it as tight as possible. So we're removing those requirements for government-backed projects.
And also because we are hearing from those developers that their residents do not have these vehicles, and so installing
Supply
something.
and demand is taking place there, and so if they need it, they don't need it, so they shouldn't have to build it.
So that's we're trying to balance the comments that we heard from the council
Just making a point.
with the last proposal.
But what I'm hearing is that you're still requiring it to be EV capable to reduce the cost of putting it in the future, when it may be much more common for people who are living in those affordable units to own an electric capable vehicle.
Correct. So instead of, as you see on the chart that's on the table, and one of the things we are proposing is to put this into chart form to make it easier for people to understand, is instead of having 2% at EV capable and 2% at with a full charger, it would be 4% as EV capable for those projects.
Which is a lot less expensive than having to build it already there, right? I mean, having to build it later.
The intent with the EV capable is shown, and we have a chart from Denver that looked into these costs, was that if you have to install the raceway and the conduit and all of that after the site has been fully developed, it's going to cost more to do that, to add those spaces later on, than it is to reserve that panel space in your electrical room and include the raceway up front.
Okay.
Charlie, your thing is on.
Everybody is so positive that EVs are going to carry the day at some point. When people travel and we're a destination city, where are these people going to be charging their cars, the influx of tourists? Would it not be prudent to, while we're talking to developers about planning ahead for their residents, gas stations and fuel outlets installing similar stuff to handle the motoring public when all this blows up like y'all say it will?
So one of the reasons that we were proposing hotels, large-scale retail, and the commercial standalone parking lots was to address visitors to the city. Because typically from the research that we've done, when you're charging your vehicle, it's not like a gas station where you go in 5 minutes, you're there for 5 minutes, you fill your tank and you leave. Charging typically takes longer, and so in order to accommodate that, putting charging stations in locations where visitors are likely to go. So for example, if you're doing a commercial parking lot downtown, and someone's gonna be walking around for a while where they can plug in, if you're going to a major retail center that has a lot of different options, may have restaurants where you can plug in while you go shop and eat, or if you're going to a hotel and you're staying overnight. So that was what we put in to address the visitors. Okay. And that is the conclusion of the presentation and the proposal. So again, the changes that we've made, it doesn't change on the number of spaces or the type of charger that would have to be installed. What we are doing is limiting that applicability to those 4 uses that you see on the screen, providing the ability for affordable and workforce housing developments that are receiving financial assistance to only do EV capable, and providing incentives in terms of number of parking spaces for minimum and maximum.
Okay, Ms.
Are we requiring similar lots to provide moped parking spaces?
I believe we do have a requirement in terms of, I believe it's motorcycle parking, and Brian is shaking his head yes. So we actually do have a percentage of spaces that have to be sized for two-wheel vehicles.
All right.
That's the end of the presentations this
Okay,
morning.
all right. With that, any other questions? Stand adjourned.